we've been talking a lot over the past few days about uncertainty. So not one single crisis, but sort of a range of current crises, climate crisis, crises of polarization and conflicts, wars, trends in inequality. And I think this sort of uncertainty is problematic, not only because it's hard for governments to manage, it's hard for governments to figure out how to govern in very uncertain times. We saw this, for instance, during COVID. But it's also difficult for citizens to deal with, and it can contribute to weakening trust in governments.
There are many of the crises, but I think one that we need to tackle is the issue of misinformation, fake news. Clearly, it's very difficult for people to trust each other, to have a common identity, and to be willing to collaborate with each other when we cannot agree on the facts. Okay, when we don't know what is true and what it isn't, when we have doubts about what others are doing or the interests of others. So I think that's a major issue. We are working on that. We are trying to reduce misinformation. We are working with fact-checking organizations. We are working with governments in order to make sure that we can stop the spreading of misinformation, increase how much the information that is available to people, and from that trying to rebuild trust in the information and in each other.
We think that one of the biggest challenges for social cohesion over the next few decades is going to be climate change. Our estimates show that if we don't do mitigation, around 200 million people might die from now to the end of the century. Even if we do mitigation, around 40 million people might die from now to the end of the century. This is a big test for social cohesion because climate change will affect people in very different ways in different regions. It will be a genuine inequality bomb, and therefore only if we are able to act together in mitigation and in adaptation, we will be able to manage this crisis in a satisfactory way for humanity.
I don't think there's the one global crisis that threatens social cohesion in each and every society, but rather that each society is affected by various crises differently. I think one of the major crises threatening social cohesion around the world currently is climate change, and particularly the adaptation to climate change. But I think also a fatigue in political processes, in democratic processes, and connected with this polarization is one thematic complex that is threatening to lead to the fragmentation of societies around the world.
And I say at a global level because if we think about the issue of COVID-19 and the impact that it had, and that was one of the biggest polycrisis that the world has ever encountered. And I think the response to COVID-19, especially when it came to vaccines and the distribution of vaccines, and the actions that the international community took, especially in Western countries, it made Africa, and I'm talking on the African case largely because that's where I have most expertise, is that the continent did see the rest of the globe as being in a way that doesn't treat Africa as a priority. And that does create some kind of resentment. So when it comes to global and international cooperation, the extent to which the polycrisis of COVID-19 impacted the way that Western countries responded in terms of vaccine distribution did create that tension. And I think that is one level of disruption in the global social cohesion ecosystem that needs to be managed, because at that level, African countries do see Western countries in that light. And many of our survey respondents on the African continent, when we ask people about how much they thought external actors supported their government, we do see that sense of thinking that the Western countries have not had a positive influence on the continent. And so that's a big one at a global level.
Thinking
thinking about how international cooperation can respond to polycrisis in a way that strengthens social cohesion is a big question for all of us, and we've been trying to tackle it here in Bonn. I think from where I stand, we've got to focus on multi-systemic resilience. We cannot eliminate stressors, adversities, and crises fully and globally. So we need to focus on resilience in a multi-systemic way and build it on 4 key levels: individual, group, community, institutional, and the system level. And to do that, we need integrated, holistic programming on each of these levels that speak to each other. Individual level, we need to design evidence-based programs that look at mental health, life skills, leadership skills. On the group social level, we need evidence-based tailored programs that focus on social healing and dialogue. On institutional level, we need to look at rule of law, good governance, livelihoods. And on the systemic level, we need to look at how these things interact with each other in a more systemic way. If we focus on all 4 levels, build resilience in an integrated, holistic way using evidence, tailoring it and contextualizing it, I think we will be successful in strengthening social cohesion.
So as we start to focus our attention on building and rebuilding social cohesion within our own countries, my concern would be that the importance of making sure that we continue to invest in international cooperation is a high priority for everyone. The temptation, as we rightly and reasonably and very importantly try to build and reknit the social fabrics within our countries that will pay less attention to the kinds of institutions that exist at the international and global level. So I would encourage us all to continue focusing on international cooperation.
So, in order to increase social cohesion, we need to increase trust. And how do we increase trust? Okay, so trust is the belief that others will not act opportunistically, that others will not take advantage of us. So, what is that others, be that other people, the government, can take advantage of us? They can do it when there are what we call information asymmetries. Somebody has more information than us, or power asymmetries, when somebody has more power than us. So what the international community can do, international organizations can do, is basically reduce those information and power asymmetries. How do we do that? Well, we provide information. In the case of governments, we increase transparency. We tell people what we are doing. Governments tell people what they are going to do. They show that they have done it, and they inform people that they have done it. That way, we reduce the information asymmetries. How do we reduce power asymmetries? Just by improving and strengthening institutions, just to making sure that nobody has power, that nobody can extract rents, and that goes from the typical government transactions, making sure that you don't have to pay a bribe, or making sure that there are third-party enforcers that can make sure that no government official or no other individual can take advantage of you.
Our research shows that in turbulent times, one of the main determinants of social cohesion and trust is human security, that we define as freedom from fear, freedom from want, and freedom to live a life of dignity. So international cooperation can play a very vital role supporting human security, in particular by investing in insurance, so people can feel more secure in the face of different shocks. This is particularly relevant in developing countries that are expected to, for instance, experience most of the negative effects of climate change over the next few decades.
In terms of open questions that still rest for social cohesion, there's been a lot of discussion about whether social cohesion works or not, test models, test what works, what didn't, and why. What we're not doing right now is looking at how social cohesion interacts with all the other things around it. When we invest in securitized or militarized approaches and social cohesion at the same time, what scale are we investing in those two things? How do the results counteract or contradict each other? For me, that's a huge space that we still haven't really answered a lot of the questions in. And yet, we see the flip side of that. So we often see the flip side where an intervention, for example, in health or economics or military is invested in without thinking about social cohesion. And people actually note, researchers note, that these things are missing. So I'd love to see researchers note that social cohesion is a missing factor, or maybe subpoints like trust or accountability. These kinds of things matter quite a lot. And yet we don't put those together. So for me, that's a huge. It's really important that we understand not just the value of the work and whether it has results on a small scale, but how we understand those two put together. How we think about social cohesion, but in the midst of everything else that we're doing and investing in, and how those results help or hurt each other when we think about outcomes.
I think it is important that we as researchers identify on which dimensions practice, development cooperation needs to focus in order to foster, restore social cohesion. And I think one of the essential dimensions is cooperation.
I think as researchers we often think about things like measurement and looking at patterns and trends and trying to understand the effects of social cohesion, stronger and weaker social cohesion, what's in the past influenced social cohesion. But I think a really important question for us to be tackling is what's worked to positively influence social cohesion in different countries, in different contexts, and related to that, what can we as those within particular countries and as external actors do to support strengthening of social cohesion? What works, what has worked in certain contexts that could be tried elsewhere, and how might contextual factors influence this?